All right, guys. So this is the first video we're making here. I have the 1.1 playlist. I will want you to click through all this information on here. It's not going to take that long. It's just something to look at to either remind you, refresh you, kind of get you back in the swing of things. Okay. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the undefined terms. Okay. So I'm not going to go through these laboriously. Like, we're just going to kind of touch on them, and I want to touch on the main points of these. All right. They're always going to be in the playlist. So you can always look back on them. So for this one, the biggest thing with like point is pretty simple. All right. Talked about points for a long time. Lines, again, pretty simple. They're infinite. Okay. We name them when we name them. We have the arrows, both when we're naming and when we're drawing them. The important thing is that when we are naming lines or segments or anything like that, that we name with 2 points. Okay. So we always name these with 2 points. So that's the important part. Name with 2 points, or there's another way to do it, and that's with a label or label. So that's where you can either name with 2 points or you can use the label. All right, so the 2 points we have on the line, pretty simple, is A and B. Now, if there was an additional point like C or something like that, it doesn't matter. You just pick 2, any 2 that are on the line. The label part of it. So you can kind of see, it looks like, everyone says it looks like an E, but it's actually an L. It's a cursive L right there. So we can name it line L. It's another additional way. L is not a point or anything like that. It's just a label. All right, so moving on to planes. So planes, a little bit different. They're just infinite pieces of paper. What I think about is like if you're in the middle of the ocean and you can't see the land and the water just extends in all directions, that's kind of the best way to think about something being infinite, okay? So planes, just infinite pieces of paper is what I think. When we're naming them, the important thing is we are going to name them with 3 points now, or a label, okay? So we still have that label option. So here we have 3 points. They have dots next to them. They're X, Y, and Z. So we're going to call it plane XYZ, okay? So we're naming it with 3 points. We can also name it with a label. So the label here is M. If you notice, there's no dot around M. M is not a point. It's just a label for the plane. So we can name it with a label. All right, guys. So I'm going to pause the video and get to our next section of terms. All right, so the next area that I'm going to go is to the defined terms. So just wanted you to be able to see where I'm going next. So we're in the defined terms now. For this part, the important things is you notice that we have things such as segments, all right? A segment is just a line that ends, basically. It ends, okay? So it has 2 endpoints. Notice that we name it with 2 points as well. Array, just a different kind of concept, all right? So if we're talking about array extends in one direction, all right? So it has this arrow. Anytime you see that arrow, it means it's going into infinity, okay? It's never going to stop, all right? But you also see M over here. It has an endpoint, and so that means it starts at M and goes through N all the way to infinity, okay? And then we also have opposite rays down here. And opposite rays, if you look at it, if we look at the diagram right here, it just looks like a line. So a lot of times if they might ask you the question, it seems a little tricky, but they say opposite rays form what? They form a line, okay? And again, naming it with 2 letters. The last thing and the most important part, I think, of all this that we're going to see and use to the end of the year is angles. Okay, so angles, when we're naming angles, we have 3 ways to name angles. Okay, so we're naming angles. I think that the way that you can always go to and the way that will always work is the second way. So I'm going to kind of put a little star next to it where it says PQR. Okay, so that's the way that we can always use, and that's the way you're going to see a lot of times. Because if we have angle Q there, and when we have an angle, we have a vertex, okay? And the vertex is kind of where the angle starts and goes out on both sides. So Q is our vertex right here, okay? It's kind of where the angle starts, where the angle is formed, okay? And it goes out in either direction with two separate rays and to ray QP and ray QR. So the two rays can be arranged so that they're forming an angle. Now, like I said, Q is our vertex, so we can name it as angle Q. That's our first way to name it, with the vertex. However, you got to think about this. If I extend this line and now I have Q there, but I could be talking about this angle or this angle, okay? So that's where you can only use naming by the vertex if there's only one angle shown. If there's more than one angle shown, you can't use it, all right? Now, the next part is naming with three coordinates. And this is where I want everybody to do this. I want you to put your finger on the screen, okay? Put your finger on the screen. We're going to start at P, okay? We're going to start at P and we're going to trace the angle. So if I start at P, all right, and I trace the angle, I go from P to Q, and then I go to R. And if you look, that's our name for it, angle PQR. Now, you're saying, well, why do we start with P? We don't have to start with P. We can start with R. All right, but if we want to trace this angle without picking up our finger, we either start with P or we start with R. So if we start with R and we trace the angle, we go R, Q, P. That is also another way to name this, angle R, Q, P. All right, so RQP is another way to name it. Now, if you start with Q, if you notice, you don't know which direction to go. And you're either going to have to trace over the line you just drew, or you're going to have to pick up your pencil. We don't want that. So when I think about naming an angle, I think about starting in one spot, not picking up my pencil, not retracing any part of the line, and just drawing that angle, and that'll help you to name the angle. All right? And then the last way we can name it is angle 2. This is probably the one we'll use the least, all right, because there's not a lot of times that they're going to throw the 2 in there. Sometimes they will, though. But for the majority of the time, we're probably going to be using the second way, okay? All right, guys. So I'm going to pause the video because I got to click out of here. All right, guys, so the last thing I want to talk about, it's called the 1.1 concept summary. So it just talks about, measuring with a ruler and protractor and everything. And I think the biggest thing is there's a number line here with the ruler postulate. And the one thing that I want you to kind of get out of this is if we have J at -4 and K at 1, and I said, what's the distance from J to K? First of all, hopefully you never give me a negative number, because distance can never be negative. You can't run -5 miles. Okay. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Some people say, well, you can run backwards. Well, then you run backwards 5 miles. It doesn't, you can't run a negative distance. So from J to K, if we count, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the distance from J to K is 5. So that's one way to find it out. And that's going to be helpful in our next section to understand that. And then the next thing is the protractor postulate. So the biggest thing, and we're going to practice with measuring with a protractor, I think the biggest thing is where we put the protractor. And that's where, if we have this angle, all right, and I'm going to name it JKL. Hopefully you notice that the middle letter is K, all right? If I trace it, I go from J to K to L, all right? Just tracing it with my finger. That's how I'm going to name it. If you look at this, we put the protractor, that little space that's open down there, we put it right on K, okay? So that's important, all right? That little space at the bottom, we want that on K, and then when we're measuring, we can see that the measure of angle JKL, all right? So we start over here at 0. We have 0 over here, all right? And we're measuring up, and we see that the measure of angle JKL or LKJ, doesn't matter, either one is fine, is, and for this one, we have an angle that looks like this, okay? And because on our protractor, there's going to be small and big numbers. Now, you got to think in your head, does this look like a small angle or a big angle? Hopefully, you're saying small angle, and so we're going to use the smaller numbers. That's why the measure of angle JKL is 50 degrees, okay? And so, guys, we'll do some more practice with this, but I just wanted you to make you aware of that. So if you have any other questions, please ask them in class today. All right, guys, don't hesitate to ask anything as we're going along, especially in class. That's designed for you to ask questions and everything like that. All right, guys, have a great day.